Are we live? I think we are. I hope we are. I see people already here, which is always shocking. But thank you and hello. Okay, hello to NYC, to Brisbane, Brizzy. Lovely. Oh yeah, morning. Okay, I was gonna say, man, I feel like time zone wise, that's a lot. Buffalo. Oh my gosh, Nolan, taking it back. Okay. Whew, that was a flash in the past. North Carolina, hello. Delaware. Oh, we've got somebody who's actually joining us because fobbed the spouse off to baseball. Who wants to take bets on how long any of those sports get to go this season? Over, under, anyone? Hello to Boston, Poland. Hello. Okay, we've got a United Nations going here. Well, welcome everyone. Let's see here. New Zealand. Oh, we got someone else who's able to make it to live. Yay! Welcome, Erica. Oh, speaking of the playback, while I'm thinking of this, if to the future, if you are watching this in playback and you notice that there are a gajillion ads, please leave a comment and remind me to go in and take them out. I try to remember to do that. It doesn't show up for me to do it until like time has elapsed. And Google has this like, I don't know if it's a bug. I don't know what they're doing, but like recently they have been putting in approximately like 20 ads in my live streams, and I'm not doing that on purpose. Like that's Google. So please, if you notice after the fact that there's still a ton of ads, let me know, because there should be like, I think maybe like 3. I don't know. Anyway, while I'm thinking about it, I keep meaning to tell people to tell me if they notice there's a problem. Some people have been so sweet. They're like, I don't know if you know this, but there's a lot of ads. And I'm like, no, thank you so much for telling me. Okay, anyway. Okay, we got Washington, we got Brazil. Around the corner, if you're in Nashville, hope you're staying dry, because good Lord, it is raining so hard. Okay, we've got baseball with less than a month. Well, that seems reasonable. The NFL has already gotten contamination, as has MLB. So there you go. Texas, we got a week. Japan, hello. Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed Jane Doe. It is an excellent book. It's not for everyone, but I enjoyed it. Oregon, yes, we agree. New Zealand, we stand. Welcome to Pygmy Puff Reads. Long Island, DC. What DC? I used to live in DC. Mexico. Hola. Okay, we got the whole crew here. Thank you guys. Sorry, I'm filing my nails. That's probably not great for the audio. Okay, so I took a little week off. I think I mentioned this before, but I'm trying to pace myself a little bit more on these live streams because we're going to be in... When I first started doing this, I was like, oh, we'll be in lockdown for like 3 or 4 months. That'll be great. And now I'm like, I've already been told we're going to work remotely through at least the end of the year. I don't think we'll go back till next summer. So trying to pace myself a little bit better. There you go. Knoxville, that's my hometown. UK. Yep. It has been raining almost every night, which has been thwarting my attempts to garden. That's why, right? God doesn't want me to clear the weeds out of my garden. Okay. So, yep, we're in this for the long haul. Yep, I'm thinking I probably won't go back to work until next spring. That's my guess. I think that's like the earliest that they will let us back. That's my guess. So tonight, now that we're 5 minutes in, I thought we could talk about my approach to reading and reviewing books, because this is a topic that has been coming back up recently. I think it's sort of like a perennial YouTube/Booktube discussion point. And yeah, I don't know. I saw a video from, oh gosh, I put them in the description already, so I would not forget. Sam from Thoughts on Tomes did a video about like critical. That's where this discussion came up. I think Sam. Well, we talked about this in my last live stream. I'm the old woman of Twitter. I never know what actually happens. What I surmise was that Sam made a comment about like not being able to, like, that something about reviewing and talking about how you need to be critical in your reviews. And then I guess that kind of sparked discussion about reading critically versus reading for enjoyment. So she had a video on that. Mari from My Name is Marines also had a video about critical versus enjoyment in reading, which I know is a topic in general she's really passionate about. And then she also followed it with like how, I think it was like the how I rate and review books. So those were reminding me. I don't think I've done a video on my channel about this for a couple of years. And I wouldn't say that my approach to reviewing has radically changed, but I think like I have more thoughts about it than I used to. And like, I don't know, maybe this will spark like a multi-series kind of thing, but that's what I thought we could talk about. So let me catch up with chat here real quick. Yep, we got Norway. We got more people saying we think it won't be till spring. Oh, good luck, Caitlin. Yeah, I don't know what that's going to look like. Please stay safe and don't let them keep you in close quarters just to keep getting your money for room and board. Okay, I'll just leave it there. Please be safe. I have read The Alchemist. I'm sorry, Anne. I'm not that big of a fan. I thought it was kind of. Hey, this is an example of differences of opinions about different books. My impression of it was that it was a little kind of like faux deep. So that was just my take, but I know other people feel differently, and that is fine. Hey, he's laughing all the way to the bank, right? Like it's a huge bestseller. So on that topic, how I approach rating and reviewing books. So I think they're two slightly different topics. Nolan, towards the beginning, had a shout out to a distinction we'll get into. Oh man, I need to cough. Sorry, all of this rain is just like terrible for my allergies. I keep getting all backed up. So in terms of rating, this 7 out of 7 unicorns thing. So back in the day, when I first got into Booktube, I had like my own idiosyncratic rating system that went from 0 to 7 unicorns. Because back then, I didn't really rate things on Goodreads. Like I had a private Goodreads and I was not publicly reviewing, and kind of in the public sphere of reviewing, things are so standardized to be either out of 5 stars or 1 out of 10. So I tried to keep my personal rating system, because I was really just using it for like my personal spreadsheets and stuff. So I like tried to kind of continue to use that system because that's what I had been using personally. But I did find that it was very difficult to communicate my meaning very effectively trying to use my own rating system, because I just think, especially on Booktube, the whole, sorry, I'm testing out a new nail polish here while we're talking. So if I look down, that's what it is. I just think that it's so ubiquitous within Booktube or like online reviewing on like Book Twitter and stuff, to use 1 out of 5 or to use like the Goodreads star system, that trying to have your own rating system becomes an exercise in translating whatever your own rating is into the 5-star rating system. So I kind of just gave up. I stopped trying to do my own rating system because it just wasn't really that meaningful to anyone except for me. And I do think this introduces an element that, okay, I'm going to shout you out, Little Big Bird, because at least you have to go do math. So hello, welcome. It does, what was I saying? Oh, well, when you're talking to other people about what you're reviewing instead of just yourself. So I think that's an important thing about, like, whenever you see booktubers talking about how they rate or review books, or talking about the principle, like what it means to review books or whatever, I think an important thing to keep in mind is that anybody who you see talking about that is, by definition, thinking about having to review and talk about books in a public forum. So a lot of the things that people get really intense about, I think, stems from maybe not having that layer added on. Because if you're just reviewing for yourself, or like you're only, like you're reviewing for maybe like your friends on Goodreads or whatever, I think that there's more room to have, I guess, like, to feel less of a need to have more public-oriented approaches to reviewing. Like, it can be more idiosyncratic. But like anybody who you see reviewing on Booktube or Goodreads or whatever, who is like known as a reviewer, or who gets copies of books to review for publishers, etc., they have an audience. And part of having an audience means making accommodations or trying to make yourself clear to some capacity that you don't have to do when you're just articulating your own feelings to yourself. If any of that made sense. Like, basically, when I'm reviewing a book as a part of my channel, I'm always, of course, trying to communicate my feelings about the book and my impressions about the book. But I'm also keeping in mind the fact that they are just my feelings and impressions, and that other people are going to be hearing those opinions and possibly making decisions about the author or the book or the series or whatever based on what I have to say. So with that, to my mind, my job as both a rater and a reviewer is to be clear in the rating part of it, to be clear consistently with you guys about like what different ratings mean to me. And in the reviewing part, to provide honest reviews, but to provide enough information in a review that you can figure out for yourself if it's something that you will be interested in. Like, I have people I follow on blogs, not so much on Booktube, but definitely on blogs, who, like, I have very different taste than they do in books, but I find their reviews helpful because often they like things I'm not gonna like. So like, that's helpful to me. Like, oh, you hated this because it's a friends to lovers trope. Cool, I will love that. I'm gonna go get it. Like, but it's still a helpful review to me because it's giving me information about a book to make my own decision about how I might respond to it. So that's like kind of front of mind for me, is thinking through the public facing piece of presenting my thoughts about a book. So I'll pause there and take a look at chat. Oh wow, little Big Bird really did go off here. Good luck, Little Big Bird. Let's see here. Okay, 3-star reviews are so wildly different for me. A 3-star book that I enjoyed but didn't have high expectations for versus a book that I had high expectations for but let me down. Totally different. Yeah, and I really agree with this. For me, so like, part of how I think about rating things is probably based on my time as a graduate teaching assistant. So when we were grading papers, we would, like, kind of the way that I was taught how to grade was everybody starts at a B. And I'm sorry for different educational systems that don't use the A to F system. I don't understand those, so I can't really translate it very well for you. But letter grade wise, everybody would start at a B. And like, if you did the assignment and you did it perfectly fine, you got a B. Like that in that rubric was like, you met expectations, B. If you had like a little something extra, you would get a B plus. Or if you excelled in most but not all areas, you would get an A minus. And then if you like hit it out of the park, you would get an A. And that's how I also, and then it would go in the opposite direction as well. That's how I approach giving star reviews. So for this, I actually really agree with this. 3 stars for me always means you met my expectations. You neither exceeded them nor did you like it's fine. If it's a book that I was hoping was going to be a 4 or 5 star book, then a 3 star can be kind of a letdown and kind of a disappointment, even if it technically is fine. And I feel like, okay, yeah, it's a 3 star. Like it's fine. It's a fine version of what it is. That can still be disappointing. But for a lot of books that I'm reading, like especially some of the lighter things I read, a 3 star is great. Like, yeah, you totally, you delivered what I was looking for. Good job, you. I do think that there tends to be a perception that 3 stars is a bad review. Like I get that comment sometimes that 3 stars is like bad. And I guess I don't think about it that way. I'm sure maybe some of the authors I've reviewed might disagree. I don't know. Oh, hey, Leanna. I try to review honestly, but I know people who, because they either want to be published or to work with publishers, will give either 5 stars or nothing. Yeah. And I'm trying to decide how far I want to get into this. Basically, I feel like if it is more important to you to prioritize those relationships than to really review, then I would rather people just didn't review. Because again, like layering on this idea of like, I primarily think of myself as like a resource for an audience at this point in my reviewing life. I feel like my first loyalty is to the people who are going to be reading a review from me. Now, if you have established with your audience that you basically either give something 5 stars or you don't review it at all, I guess they will know that you either like it or you don't. It's kind of like a binary thing. I have established with my audience that on my scale, 4.5 stars is a favorite of the year and a 5 star is an all-time favorite. I know that some people think that that is too high of a standard, but that is how I do my reviews. So like definitionally, not that many books can get a 4.5 or a 5 star from me, because definitionally not everything can be your favorite of the year. So actually, I think as I've gotten better and better at picking books for myself that I think I will like, I do find myself giving a lot more 3.5 and 4 stars out than I used to, because I think I'm just better at picking books. But like, I don't have that many 4.5 or 5 stars. And I don't say that to like judge people who give a lot of 5 stars out, because I think a lot of people think of 5 stars as like, oh yeah, I really like this. And I totally get that. I think for me, I feel like that lessens the helpfulness of my review for people who are trying to understand my feelings about a book. I, for the sake of my reviewing, use a 10-point system. So I just have Goodreads tags for each star rating and round up for the stars themselves. Yeah. But obviously reviewing is always subjective. And that's the thing, like we can start to talk about objective versus subjective reviewing. I think definitionally a review is subjective. I do, to the best of my ability, try to give people a sense of what I think objectively, like whatever that means, the book is like. So, you know, I'm trying to think of an example here. Okay, so like if I'm reviewing a Nora Roberts book that I love, like I'm going to gush about like, we're about to get into the trope she always has. Oh, I love like the small town dynamics. And I thought that the heroine had a really interesting profession that I enjoyed learning about. And I thought that the, family dynamics were great. But I'm also objectively going to mention something like, and the writing isn't something that's like particularly beautiful. It's more sort of like workman, like window pane prose. It's not writing that's trying to draw attention to itself. That's like a more objective data point for you. And pretty much what I'm trying to communicate with that is like, hey, I love this book. One of the things that I loved about this book was not necessarily beautiful prose. What I loved about it was the way she's able to draw these characters and like really suck me into the book, if that makes sense. So it's like I'm trying to use more objective points to describe my subjective experience of the book. I tore apart a book and then realized the agent that represented the author worked for a literary agency that had requested a partial manuscript from me, went back and deleted the video. Yeah, and I totally can hear that there's probably some conflicting interests for people who are trying to get published. At some point, if I finish something that I want to get published, I guess I'll cross that bridge when I get there. I hope I never... I guess I don't really do a lot of like rant reviews, and I know you do. And it's not necessarily because I'm against them. It's more just that most of the time I feel like I can tell you who would like something. It just might not be for me. So it's harder for me to get like fully worked up about it. In my end of the month wrap up, I do have one that I'm going to get a little worked up about, but in general. I rate things on Goodreads, but I don't include my ratings in my blog. I figured the analysis of what I felt is more important. And yeah, I think some people don't want to give an actual rating to something, which I think is totally fine. From a NetGalley perspective, I think there's an expectation that you're going to review it on Goodreads and give it a rating. And I also think because the star rating system has become sort of the like lingua franca of how people communicate their feelings about a book on Booktube, it's hard, I think, to talk about your feelings without getting into what you would rate it. But then that's also tricky because it's sort of a shorthand. And as we were talking about earlier, 3 stars to some people means something different than what it might mean to me, for example. 5 is I love, 4 is some factor preventing me from giving it a 5, 3 is meh, less than that is I'm probably DNFing. Yeah, I will say I probably don't give out that many 1 stars because usually if I don't like it enough to give it a 1 star, I'm going to DNF it. I do give out a good number of 2 and 2.5s of things that are not so long that I will stick out, or like there's something about it that just is sort of helping me pass the time or whatever. But it's rare that I give out a 1 star. We will talk about getting that one at the end of the month because I definitely had one this month I did that for. I've been thinking recently about how I can be careful myself in noting things I don't like in a book that someone else may enjoy, plus informing the reader enough to make their own judgment. Yeah. And that's really the goal of my reviewing is I also, something I personally don't really enjoy in reviews is people who give like the bulk of the review is a recap of what happens in the book. I just don't feel like that's that helpful because you can just kind of read the back of the cover to get a sense of it. So I don't know. I find I want to prioritize in my reviews, or like my approach is talking about, and I mean, I think if you watch this channel, you probably know this, a big part of how I experience books is thinking about them in the context of their genre. So often what I'm talking about in my reviews is how something does or doesn't conform to its typical trope or genre conventions. Like that tends to be something that I talk more about in my review. And then I also try to give people a sense of like tone and what kind of reading experience it is versus like this happened and then this happened. I don't know. Like I try to think about like what would be helpful information to somebody deciding if they were going to pick this book up, or like what would I want to know about a book before I picked it up. Yeah. Yep. Everybody can have different takes on Agatha. I mean, to be fair, I still really love The Bureaucrat. Sad Cypress have more so on, but fair enough. Yes, we can all come together on And Then There Were None. Um, 3 stars hard for me. It's like either I may not read more in the series or I was slightly disappointed. Yeah. 3 stars, like it also just kind of depends on what I'm coming to the book for. Like recently, I found a new Kindle Unlimited author I've been really enjoying named Lucy Eden. And like, even if some of those books, quote unquote, only end up being 3 stars, like what I'm coming to that for is like something lighthearted, fun, like kind of just puts you in a good mood. And as long as it does that, even if it's not like the best version of a contemporary romance, like that's fine. Like I'm coming to it just to like have some fun. So I think it just kind of depends on what you're wanting from the book as to if a 3 star is good or bad. Most books on Goodreads have bell curve ratings, so there are so few books that are so well loved by everyone or so very, very disliked by everyone, making nuanced reviews for most books helpful. Yeah. That's the thing. Like, I'm always kind of shocked if I see something on Goodreads that has like definitely less than like a 3.7. If it's got a lot of ratings, I will give it a side eye just because people seem to give so many 5 stars out over there that like I get a little suspicious because I'm like, oh, because to me a 3.7 is like a perfectly good book, but I feel like on Goodreads everyone tends to skew up. Like they tend to have more of what Leanna was talking about of like either a 5 or a 1. Like, I don't know. Yeah, that's pretty much how I think about a 3 star too. Yeah, and I think that's totally fair. I think a lot of people feel that way about a 5 star. Like, yeah, I really enjoyed this, 5 stars. Learning how rare your 4s and 5s are makes me so much happier about your 4 star for the blade itself. Well, the thing is, like, a 4 star to me means it's a book I really enjoyed, but it wasn't necessarily like a favorite of the year, and it wasn't necessarily an all-time favorite. But like, I really, really liked it. Like, I had a good time in it. If it's like in the case of the blade itself, it's the first in a series, so I will continue with it. Like, hell, I've sprung for like the fancy hardback versions of that series because I did really like it. Also, I talked about this in my high fantasy video on Sunday, but I think I've also realized, especially in sci-fi and fantasy, it's hard for me to give individual books in the series more than a 4, but like as a whole, it can, like, I think of it as like a 4.5 or a 5 star kind of thing. I think that makes sense. I feel okay giving 3 stars. It means I liked it, just wasn't a fave. Yeah. And I agree. I think 2 stars are probably often my most disappointing books because 2 stars to me means like there was something in this that kept me going, but it like didn't work ultimately, or like it really did end up kind of disappointing me. I just have to explain myself to book club friends that I do enjoy our books, but I reserve a 5 star rating for an all-time fave. Yeah. And I mean, again, I don't think it's like right or wrong to do it. That's just how I do it. And I do try to be consistent in my reviewing so that you guys know what different ratings mean for me. Like, you know, kind of like where I'm coming from when I give a certain rating. Okay, here's somebody who does 1 to 7. Yeah, and I when I had my 1 to 7, I realized I could translate most of that into half stars. So I didn't used to really do half star ratings, and Lord knows I wish Goodreads would let us do that. I think once some of these other like Storygraph and Booksloth and stuff take off, maybe once there's higher adoption rates over there, we can finally get our half star paradise. But I think a lot of the nuance on my 1 to 7 scale when I had it, or 0 to 7 scale, I was able to kind of just put into 4.5, 3.5, and 2.5 stars, and that kind of like got the job done. Okay, yeah, deleting all my YouTube content so I could just focus on writing. Yeah, I think that makes sense, or like, you know, maybe AuthorTube or something like that. I really do sympathize with people who are trying to get published and like what you do with reviewing. Like I said, I feel like I'm gonna have to cross that bridge at some point if I ever actually decide to try to get published. Are there any books that you loved and gave 5 stars now no longer feel like are 5 stars for you? I feel like most 5-star reads for me is a book that stays with me, so I don't always immediately give a 5-star. Yeah, I feel like I usually either have such a strong response to it that immediately it's clear that it's a 5-star, or I'll go back and bump things up to a 5-star. I would say books that are no longer 5 stars for me are more books that I read a long time ago and were favorites at that point in my life, but are no longer favorites to me just based on like how I've changed or like how my taste has changed or whatever. I'm trying to think if recently I've bumped something from a 5 to like a 4.5 or a 4. I don't think I've done that recently, but I'm sure at some point in the channel I have. Yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, I'm pretty spoiler immune, which is weird because I do think I tend to give pretty spoiler-free reviews in general. I think, how to say this, I think some people think any information about a book is a spoiler. Like to anybody else in here who does reviewing or Booktube or anything, I'm sure you can attest that you've had somebody at some point get mad at you for quote unquote spoiling something. I try to be sensitive to that. But at some point, like, to know if you want to hear any kind of discussion or talk about the book, you're going to have to hear information about it. I try to keep my information much more to non-plot specific things. And I try to keep my reviews focused on either like things I liked in the writing, character kind of things, or themes. And I think that tends to be less on the spoilery end. But some people feel like any information about a book is a spoiler, and I just don't really know what to tell them at that point. Like, why are you watching Booktube? Because everything is a spoiler. I always find it hard to reconcile books which I enjoyed that were objectively, technically a bad, not good book or text. The same for books that were technically good, but that I struggled with. Okay, yeah. So like, this is maybe a good juncture. Yeah, I've had that same issue. I often give high ratings for things I just enjoyed, knowing that they're not fabulous technically, I guess. So one thing that I feel very strongly about is that I subscribe to the, I think it's the Roger Ebert theory of reviewing, of like, you have to take a book on its own terms. So, for example, in last month's wrap-up, I gave 4.5 stars to The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander and to When She Purrs by Ruby Dixon. So I think both of them are excellent examples of what they are and what they are trying to do. I really don't believe in judging that was a sci-fi romance. Like, I want to judge the book on its own terms. I don't think it's a reasonable expectation to expect a sci-fi romance to have like Great Gatsby level like themes with different colors or like motifs with different color. Like, that's not what the book is trying to do. And I think acting like that is the only standard by which a book is a good book or like well written is not reasonable. Like, Jurassic Park is a fantastic movie. Like, it's one of the best movies ever made. And it's, not like on the same level as I'm sure some like nice, more kind of like whatever, like German films from the 30s or what, like it's not, it doesn't have the same sort of like technical artistic aspirations, but like it is a really fantastic version of what it is. So like, I guess what I'm trying to say about this is like, just because something, like for example, something that is a classic, I can recognize that technically it has a lot of things that are great about it, but if I personally don't enjoy it, I'm not going to give it a 4 or 5 star just because it has a lot of like technical proficiency to it in what it's trying to do. If any of that made sense. Like, I get really annoyed when I see people who are like, oh, you get like, this, pulpy mystery got a 5 star, like, you cretin, you have no taste or whatever. Like, that's just so, I call that a lack of going with itness. At some point, you have to buy into a book's project. And if you are not, if the book can't get you to buy into that project, then that's fine. Like, talk about that. But I don't think that you should say a book is bad just because it is choosing a lighter tone or a lighter subgenre to play in. I get heated about that one. As a reader who's not public facing, I found the Goodreads rating system was unnecessary pressure, so I've stopped doing so, and it's been good for me. Yeah, I think that's totally valid. I think if you're public facing, it's very hard to get away from it, but I think that totally makes sense. I love reading reviews after I finish a book to see other readers' takes. Some books I avoid reading reviews, mysteries and thrillers, and I love reviews for nonfiction. I really love reading reviews for books if I've had a problem with it once I'm done, because I'm like, am I crazy? Did anybody else see this? Like, that is my favorite kind of lens through which to read a review, of like validating that I'm either too picky or not picky enough or whatever. 5s to excellent books with technical and emotional enjoyment, but only actual favorites gets a spot on my Goodreads favorite shelf. Yeah. And my friend Bethany, I think she calls those 6-star books that are like both excellent and favorites. How much does sticking or falling down at the ending change your final rating? It depends on the genre. Like, for instance, mystery, I'm pretty forgiving on an ending in a mystery not sticking the landing, because honestly, it's really hard, I think, to give somebody a satisfying ending to a mystery. Whereas in a romance, actually, it's pretty easy to give a satisfying ending. Like, you just got to make it plausible that these two people are going to be together forever. So if you can't do that, like, the book, I think, is more of a failure. It also depends on if it's the ending in a series book or if it's the, like, an ending. So, like, a not satisfying ending in book 2 of a 4-book series, I'm probably going to be more forgiving of than the actual conclusion to the series. Like, if the series as a whole doesn't end well, it taints my entire feeling about a series. So I do value authors writing in series who can stick the landing. I would argue Alona Andrews does a very good job of that. Do you find it hard not to finish a book once you start reading it, even if you are not enjoying it very much? No, I don't have a problem DNFing things. I'm less likely to DNF something that's not that long. Like, I'm more likely to push through it. But no, in general, I don't have a problem DNFing things. I have far too many books I'm trying to get through to spend too much time on one I'm not liking. When I watch Booktube, I really don't pay that much attention to star ratings, to be honest. I'm looking for tropes I like, types of characters who sound interesting, general overviews of plot. Same for me. I often go back over my Goodreads and drop them down from a 5 to a 4 as I read more and more and can tell the difference between better writing. Yeah, I wonder as I age, am I pickier? Possibly. I'm doing well. How are you? Is your name pronounced Dn? Novelist Dn? I'm well. How are you? Yep. There you go. I love your deep dive reviews like the one you did for How to Be Safe. I don't care about spoilers. Let's get into the nitty gritty. Yeah, I don't get a chance to do those very often anymore. My isolated closed circle mystery reviews are the closest I do very much of that anymore. Now that I don't have any of these like Agatha Christie series I'm getting through. Yeah, okay, Native Lady Book Warrior posts 2 reviews of the same book, spoiler-free and spoiler reviews. Sam from Thoughts on Tome does that too. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good approach if you want to avoid the wrath of people getting mad at you about spoilers. Oh my gosh, Nolan, yes, I love that audio. I love audio commentary tracks in general for movies. I'm so sad that those are kind of like not as much of a thing anymore, but like in the 2000s, I love audio commentary tracks. And he had a few good ones, but that Casablanca one was really good. Structure my reviews. Summary, if necessary, important aspects, characters, world building, themes, and plots, maybe quotes as examples, conclusion, and compare. that seems like a very helpful review format. I gave both Red, White, and Royal Blue and Say Nothing 5-star this year, and they could hardly be more different. Yeah, I mean, I think it's about, is it a good version of what it is? I have felt bad giving 5 stars to books in the past, e.g. Moby Dick, which is a novel that I had an extraordinarily hard time with, but gave it 5 stars because of how amazingly good written it is. I think that's perfectly good reason to give it 5 stars. For me, a 5-star has that extra something in terms of technical execution and pure enjoyment. Hard to quantify, explain, but it's a feeling I get. Not all my 5 stars are all-time favorites, though. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Anne-Marie. Like, it's almost like this kind of X factor. And I have certain books, like, oh, here's an example of one I dropped down. Last year, I felt I was like thinking, got too much in my head, basically, about On Immunity by Eula Biss. And I was like, this is such a technically good book. And like the writing is really good and it's interesting, but it didn't have that like full something to it to really make it a 4.5. So I think later I went back and made it a 4 because it is really good, but it didn't have that just like special wow factor that pushed it over for me. I try to be as objective as possible, but if I feel really strongly about something, then I let all the passion out. Yeah, and that's the thing, and this is a point I think Mari and Sam were both making, is like enjoyment or like your emotional response to something is not devoid, like completely divorced from your critical response to something. Like, you know, again, thinking about When She Purrs by Ruby Dixon, like you guys heard me like squee about that book and just like, I just loved it for these reasons. But I also like part of what I loved about it was like, this is a book that's like hitting all of these sort of like trope pleasure buttons for this like kind of campy sci-fi book, but it also has like this layer of thematic depth that like the whole time I was thinking about like free will in relationships and like how that plays out in gender dynamics, like that the critical part of my response is tied into the emotional part. Like they're not totally divorced from each other. Okay. To clarify, when I said bad book, I didn't mean about a particular genre, but I think for things like historical fiction or an author's first novel where the story is engaging but the writing is poor. Yeah, Lucy, I was just sort of riffing on that as sort of a general idea. Usually, if there's parts of a book that don't work for me, like I try to kind of quantify that. And like there are times where, I'm trying to think of an example. Like, okay, like Tessa Wiegert, Death in the Family. I talked about this in my isolated closed circle mystery review I did recently, but like technically there are problems with that book. It's the first in the series. I'm not sure if it's her debut, but like the writing in that book has some problems, I think. But I enjoy that trope so much, and she was able to deliver on that trope so much that like I think I said in my review, objectively, this is probably closer to a 3-star, but because I like this trope so much, I had a really good time, so I'm giving it a 4-star. So may have missed this at the start of the stream, but when did you begin or fully develop your current rating system? Yeah, I developed it like probably around the time I was in grad school. But I had to change it a couple of years ago once I came on to Booktube because it was too cumbersome to try to explain. And actually, it's only been this year, like last month, I finally put up my like official reviewing policy, just so that I have something to like point publishers and authors and folks to, so they understand kind of like not just how I approach reviewing books, but also some things like, hey, if you give me a book and I read it, I will rate it. Like I will review it. I'm not going to not review it just because I end up not liking it. Like if I read it enough to give it a rating, I will do that. So like know that before you know, you give me a book to read. Like even if I don't like it, I will end up giving it a review. So I just want to make sure people like understand that's a thing. Yeah. The ending. Oh, Manuel, I am going to make an entire video about why you're wrong about that. I'm just kidding. You can think whatever you want, but I think the ending of Jane Eyre is so misunderstood in the 21st century outside of its original historical context. But anyway, I mean, it would have to be something pretty egregious for me to bump it down a full star. So, yeah, and this is a whole other thread, Melanie. I was trying to decide if I was going to get into that in the stream. You have to take something as a representative of what writing was doing at the time. You can't judge 19th century by what makes a book good today. I think that's true and not true. I don't think it's reasonable to hold somebody writing in the 1700s to the same style preferences we have today, or the same like kind of cultural perspectives we have today. Like that to me seems to be just like not a very helpful lens to take in totality. But I also think as reviewers, it's disingenuous, or like, I think it takes a certain amount of privilege, I know it's a dirty word, to be able to say like, well, I'm just like my emotional responses is completely unaffected by something that may be coming up in this 19th century novel. So like, I think that acting like a reader who says like, hey, I'm trying to think of an example. Okay, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin in its time period or in its context was like a completely revolutionary book that, like, for good or for ill, like whatever we want to say about it now, like played a very significant part in terms of like changing hearts and minds about the plight of enslaved people in the US. Like that is historically a fact of what happened. If you read the book, you can like, I think if you have some synthetic imagination, can understand why it was like an enjoyable, like it's a melodrama and it's very emotionally engaging. And I don't think it's like wrong to say somebody, like, I don't think somebody who says like they enjoy that book is wrong. However, I also think saying that somebody who reads that book and says, well, this is playing off like racial tropes that are just like, I don't even know what the right adjective for them are, like paternalistic, uncomfortable to today's sensibilities. Like, I think somebody whose emotional response to that is like, I don't like this isn't fun for me to read, and therefore I don't like this book. I think that that's a completely valid response to how somebody feels about a book as an object of entertainment. So some of it, I think, gets into like reading purely for pleasure versus reading books as a piece of history, which often is a part of how I like to read. So it becomes reading for pleasure, if that makes sense. So like some of the, like, for example, some romance novels from the 80s, I can't read those uncritically for enjoyment, but I enjoy critically reading them as a piece of history of that genre, if any of that makes sense. So I think it's like a very like multifactorial conversation. And I think trying to apply simple heuristics to how to review books that are not in our time period or not from our cultural moment, I think that there's a mistake made on both extremes of the argument, where one side is saying that you can never take any pleasure from this book, and the other side is saying you can, you know, anybody who has a problem with like the moral or ethical implications of this book is wrong. Like, I think neither of those is super helpful. That was like a diatribe. Sorry. Okay, I'll move on. Don't even know what that is. Oh, is that the new Twilight book? No, hell no. I strongly dislike the original, so I have no intent of continuing in that. If that's what that is. Yeah, I was a YA target audience when those came out, and I didn't enjoy them at the time. I agree about not always giving a star rating, especially for nonfiction, but if I hate the book or love it or find it memorable enough to want to purchase, I will rate it. But things in between don't always get a review. Yeah, fair enough. And again, I think this gets into sort of the like reviewing for yourself versus reviewing publicly. I think that like the addition of an audience adds some interesting dynamics. I tend to go with my gut, and when I'm waffling, I find it helpful to go back to the Goodreads anchors. Did I like it, or did I really like it? I'm surprised how often I just snap to one or the other. Yeah, people hate on that Goodreads rating system, but I actually think it's a pretty helpful like little rubric. It's like, didn't like it, it was okay, liked it, really liked it, loved it. I mean, like that's honestly a pretty solid method of trying to review something. I know you read both trad and indie books. When you publish, which route do you see for yourself? I think I would only go trad just because the number of skills involved in indie publishing is just something, at least so long as I have a full-time job, doesn't sound appealing to me. It's cool to see that both options are becoming more and more viable. I'm struggling to get through Breakfast at Tiffany's because of the casual racial slurs. Yeah, I mean, I read that and I agree. Also, Mickey Rooney in the adaptation. We can just even just say that. It's amazing things that were no big deal before books can really be a time capsule. Yeah, and I actually find that really enjoyable to that was a weird thing to say. I think it is, I enjoy finding out about people's attitudes from the past. And I find that interesting and enjoyable. The attitudes themselves are often not interesting or enjoyable. Though I also think one fallacy people make is assuming that just because, I mean, again, like we want to get into like Uncle Tom's Cabin, like we kind of tend to have this narrative about American history of like, oh, it came out this week. The necessary evil thing, like enslavement was just like everybody thought that was fine. And I think an important part of reading history is saying like, no, like there have always been people who were like, bitch, what? Like, what are we doing? Like, I think that's an important and interesting attitude if you read kind of between the lines of literature from these time periods. Like, there have always been people who were like, this is wrong. I try to find a balance when reviewing rating. Even if I don't personally like something, if I can see that it is objectively decent, I won't trash it. Yeah, and I'm pretty much the same. Like often I find things are just like not my cup of tea, and that doesn't mean it's terrible, but it might mean that it's terrible for my taste, but not for someone else's. And it is surprising that you can compare some books to other books from the same year or decade and see that it was ahead of its time, even though reading it now, it doesn't seem like that. Yeah. Or you can find, like Howard's End, I think reads incredibly well more than 100 years later in terms of its attitudes about like class and like money stuff. So sometimes it stays ahead of its time. I find rating my books helps whenever I need to calm my shelves, especially when I'm being swayed by a pretty book. Yeah, I do. I unhaul a lot, so that is helpful to me. If I give something a 3-star and I have it in physical form, I would need a pretty strong reason of why I was holding on to it to not unhaul it. Arcs, do you ever go back to verify critiques once published and subsequently change rating or narrative? What's your process if you do? Or let most stand forever as arc review in your disclaimer? I keep all of my books that I read as arcs on an arc shelf on Goodreads. So it's always there. I don't really go back and verify critiques. I've just not really had a book where I had a big issue with it and heard or found out that there was a big change up once it was published. But that's not really something I worry about. I mean, honestly, my opinion on that is like, if it's good enough to be giving out to people to read outside of beta readers, like you kind of got to take whatever that review ends up being. Shaming how someone rates their books is silly. It does affect my takeaway from the rating, but it's their rating. Expecting everyone to follow the same rules as I do for rating is ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, I don't expect everyone to, yeah, I agree. Like everybody rates a little bit differently. I think part of the conversation that came up that the videos I was talking about at the beginning of the stream were talking about is, I do think that if you're rating for a public audience, if you tend to be kind of like what Leanna was talking about at the beginning, like either you give it 5 stars or nothing, I do think that tends to limit the utility of it for other people. But at the same time, if your audience knows that about how you rate things, that could also still be useful. So I just try to be clear when I'm talking about reviews, like why I'm giving why I'm saying what I'm saying and like what my rating is or rating means. I started writing reviews on Goodreads so I could remember why I gave books a specific rating. Nev, I could not relate to this more, especially because I just read a lot. So sometimes I'm like, oh, I gave that 3 stars? Oh, what? Oh, okay, yeah, that's right. That had that weird thing that came up in the 3rd act or whatever. It's nice to be able to reread my thoughts instead of wondering why I rated a book 3 stars years ago. Oh, hello to Argentina. Welcome. Wuthering Heights, Tess, and Dante are mixed into fanfiction like 50 Shades and After. Do you think fans of these books, especially teenagers after reading After, will want to read the classic novels? Could be. I mean, I get really I mean, I know I sometimes probably have moralized about what teens are or are not reading, but honestly, I'm mostly just really excited that teens are reading anything. So like if it did inspire them to read a classic, that's awesome. But like, honestly, even if they're just reading fan fiction, at least they're reading for pleasure. Anybody who reads for pleasure, I'm like, yes, keep doing this. Unless it's something like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a book I would not be excited about. There's very few that I would not be excited somebody was reading. This conversation reminds me, I've been wanting to read at least one Fabio cover book for history, LOL, but it seems a lot of them are too problematic, I guess, for my taste. I'm going to tell you, any romance novel written before 1990, probably you need to go in expecting to read it as an artifact of history. And if you can get enjoyment from reading it that way, then I think you're fine. But like, yeah, again, there's like a whole series of videos I want to do on this, but yeah, they're just really different genre conventions at the time, and those conventions were interpreted by the readers and by the writers in a very different way than a reader today would interpret them. So just go in knowing that, I guess. I think the earliest books that I feel okay telling people to read are some of the like 1990s Garwoods and Nora Roberts and Lindsay Sands stuff. Like they do still have some of those elements, but I think they're not prominent enough in the story that they're still like, you can still just sort of read them for fun. So that said, where is my first romance novel I ever read? Was published in 1987. It's called The Marriage Deal by Sarah Craven. Check out the Femilet she's got. This is a Harlequin Presents. I tracked it down. This was at a beach house I was staying at with like a bunch of my friends. And we all took turns reading like the dirty parts aloud to each other. So in the early 2000s, teenage me could still get some level of unironic enjoyment from a Harlequin Presents from the 80s. So whatever that tells you. Do you ever just put books in an unhaul pile after you're done if you know you won't reread them? I've done that and it helps minimize the size of my books. Yeah. I went to the used bookstore recently, so these are empty, but I keep my unhaul bags here, and if I know I'm not going to read it again, it goes straight into that bag. I've been reading Thomas Jefferson's autobiography. I like him, but don't agree with all of his opinions. It's interesting to read his thoughts on slavery. He wanted it to end in the future, but he still owns slaves, of course. Yeah, I mean, I think that to me would be something I would put in the category of historical document that I could enjoy as a historical document. But like, I think Thomas Jefferson's philosophy, well, to get political, I mean, I think his whole agrarian idyllic and the utter hypocrisy that he had about the enslavement of people who he was forcibly having intimate relationships with, like, I don't have a lot of room for enjoyment of him beyond kind of as history. Whereas, like, trying to think, like, and they're usually people who are pretty subversive in their time period. Like, I can unironically enjoy, like, what's her face? Hannah. She's got the little wimply hat, and she was an evangelical feminist in the early 1800s in Britain, and she had made it like a point of pride to never read A Vindication of the Rights of Women. And like, even though I don't really like agree with some of the stuff she's like philosophically thinking, like, she has really interesting things to say, and I think was pretty subversive. So like, I can uncritically enjoy her in a way that I couldn't for Jefferson. I don't know. Have you ever read El Amor en los tiempos del cólera? Please forgive pronunciation there. Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I unfortunately tried to read 100 Years of Solitude in my early college days and did not get into it, and have never really tried again. He's one of those, like, I want to circle back around to it at some point kind of authors, but I kind of gotta get far enough away from that experience that I don't really remember it anymore. I'm just coming back to Toni Morrison to try her again after a similar experience. Yeah, Caitlin, that seems completely reasonable. I recently read a Garwood from the 80s. Well, yeah, the 80s, I'm not going to make any representations for. And that's the thing. I do find that really interesting in some of the Garwood and Robert stuff from that era of, like, you can tell it's meant to be progressive. And I do find that really interesting as, like, kind of a meta-textual experience between me in 2020, the author and the readers in the 80s, and like the vortex that creates. Like, that tension I find an enjoyable dynamic. Yeah, I was born in 1987. This came out the year this book is as old as me. There you go. No, yeah, I would be caved in by my books if I didn't get rid of them. Yeah, I agree, Shelley. Like, that is, and honestly, that's part of what I enjoy about Kindle books, is that a lot of things I reread would be the equivalent of sort of like mass market paperback kind of things. Like, they're just sort of like light, fun rereads. So I save the space by having those on Kindle. Yeah, I mean, forced seduction is a thing. Again, I want to do like a whole video about this, but yeah. I just read Tarzan the other day, and though it was interesting from a historical archive point of view, as a piece of entertainment, it was maddening. And that's the other thing. I think it's legitimate for us to also say, like, hey, this was entertaining, when it was published in the 1850s or whatever. And like by today's standards, it is no longer entertaining. And that's okay. Like, it's okay for us to have, you can say something is a classic because of like maybe what it did in a genre or like innovations in it or whatever. But you can also say like, it was an innovation at the time, but like now it's boring AF and like it's not entertaining to me. Yeah. Yeah, I like her channel. It's okay, Skeleton Key. Chronicle of a Death Foretold. Okay, good to know. There we go. Got Harlequin Love in the house. I remember sneaking my mother's romance novels of the 1990s primarily, and I shudder to think of what progressive content was in there or straight up cringy. Well, that's the thing. It's also like very interesting. I don't know. If you're interested in the history of romance, I am working slowly on a series that I will do at some point on this channel, but also like the Fated Mates podcast, I think has some really interesting discussions of these like old school books in the genre and like really reading them critically, like with a literary, like really approaching them with like love of the genre, but also criticism. But it is really interesting to think about like, I don't know, like these women were, you know, high-powered like real estate agents in the 80s, and that was seen as like super like, I don't know, like a working girl kind of thing. I don't know. I was watching Murder, She Wrote the other day because of course I was. And it is funny just like seeing different time periods in their vision of what like a progressive or like modern woman is like is so interesting. Do you ever rate books retroactively without rereading? Yeah, I've done this like for books that I read like as a kid, kind of a thing of like, oh yeah, like I did read that and I remember it fondly. That's about it though. Mostly like in the context usually of I'm recommending it in a video, I go to the Goodreads page to get a picture of the book cover, and I realize I never actually rated it on my Books Like Whoa Goodreads because I had a private Goodreads where I had more of those rated, but sometimes the rating didn't migrate over to my public account. So, nice. Hurrah for Murderbot. Okay, we got another vote for Chronicle of a Death Foretold. 80s Baby, Stole My Mom's Teen Romances, and the cringy V.C. Andrews. I'm kind of sad that I didn't read V.C. Andrews as a teen because I think now I could only enjoy it as a historical artifact, but I am sure that the teenage me could like have unironically enjoyed that. Oh, Smart Women Read Romance. Yeah, there's a lot of better and better, like just really good romance podcast material out there. Oh, Murder, She Wrote. Yeah, I love it so much. And somebody, I forget who, somebody on a video commented and told me or made me aware of the fact that the Peacock Network, the streaming app, has all seasons of Murder, She Wrote streaming, at least here in the US, for free if you get the free version. So like that's been on in the background constantly for me for the last little bit. I have a hard time trusting my own opinions about books. That's why I rarely DNF. I like to give the authors every benefit of the doubt and check others' reviews. I actually hate this about me. Maybe I'm just such an opinionated bitch. I just like I think I just try to really have trust in the readers or watchers of my reviews that people understand that it is only my opinion. Like I am so opinionated and I'll come strong with my opinion, but like I have a lot of space for other people to have different reactions. So like, yeah, I don't think that my opinion, well, I mean, clearly I think my opinion's right or else I wouldn't have it, but like on a meta level, I understand that my opinion is not the only opinion. So I try to have faith in the consumers of my reviews that, like, this is my honest response to something, but doesn't mean that you can't have a different one. Do you feel personal public-facing responsibility to list book trigger warnings? I don't do this, nor feel the need to, but I see more people concerned on Goodreads that they should as review. I do feel like giving content warnings, because to me, that's what it is. It's a content warning. I do feel a responsibility to do that, especially for kind of that tension I was talking about earlier of there are some things in books that some people will be able to read through or around that other people either can't or do not want to. And I think both are valid. So like, okay, like for instance, recently the Man in the Brown Suit from Agatha Christie, I felt like I really needed to give people content warnings about the colonialism and sort of like paternalistic racism in that book. For me, it kept it from being a 5-star book, but I still, because it was not front and center in the book, it didn't totally destroy that reading experience for me. But I could see a different reader that would really like materially keep them from getting through that book. And I think that's important information to communicate to someone so that they can make their own decision about if they can or if they want to read through those things. So I try not to get too specific. I try to just give sort of like general area warnings, or I'll say something like I just did a review recently for The Night Swim, and it's really intense in its content. So basically what I said is, hey, read this description carefully. If you're thinking that there will need to be a content warning for the things that this book seems to be implying it's going to talk about, it does need content warnings for that. And know that that is a prominent piece of what is happening in the book. Like, that's kind of what I try to give people a sense of. So yeah, all that to say, yes, I do feel responsibility to do that as sort of a public-facing reviewer, to give people what I think is important information that they may need to decide if they want to read something. Oh, Nora Roberts' Irish Thoroughbred. Nice. I've not read those. I'm trying to get some of her older ones. I'm on the fence. I may do like a project, like read every Nora Roberts, just because I think that might be kind of fun. And I have made my way through every single one of the in-depth books. So like, surely that was a huge obstacle to doing that. I don't know. We'll see. Oh, VC Andrews. Yes, Murder, She Wrote. I only started reading contemporary romance last fall. I thought myself was too much an SFF nerd to enjoy them before, I guess. Yeah, I think it's always just finding what works for you in a genre. So you should definitely get on some Ruby Dixon. Yeah, I think that if you read Twilight as a teen and you enjoyed them as a teen, it's a lot easier to do that. I didn't like them when I read them as a teen, so I wouldn't like them now. I would definitely not like them now. I used to finish any book I started as a point of principle. In recent years, I've taken up DNFing if I'm not having any fun. Yeah, I know some people just can't bring themselves to DNF, but I'm telling you, it's a game changer. The days dwindle down. It's the cold case episode. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Have I seen that? I feel like I have, but it's been years. Okay, yeah, I'll have to keep my eyes open for that. What one did I read or watch recently? I recently watched the one with Jason Begay as the hot young aerobics instructor who comes to town, and like his friend is taking Eve Simpson for a ride. That was really fun. I forget what that one was called, but that was a good one. I hadn't seen in a long time. Yep. What do you do if you send a book you agree to review but find it too uncomfortable to finish? I haven't had that experience. I do really try to get through anything I'm given to review in advance. So I've only ever not reviewed one thing, and it was because I was just so meh about it that I was like, I'm going to end up giving this 2 stars, and I think other people might like it. So that was the only time I've ever stopped reading something I was supposed to be reviewing. So I don't know. We'll find out if I ever get there. Have you ever had to interact with an author whose books you didn't like or gave a negative review? No, not directly. I mean, I've been at an event with an author where that was the situation, but I mean, it's little old me. I'm sure that they didn't know. And it wasn't a bad review. It just wasn't like a fully positive one. So, yeah, it's easier to DNF things I haven't bought. That is fair. Yes. Okay. I'm glad that was helpful. The time period it was written in, who was written by, didn't bother me too much. I was more annoyed about how impulsive the main character was. Oh my gosh. Anne makes no sense, but I love her. Yeah, and that's exactly right, honey. I think a lot of people feel that way if, like, when you kind of have the context of the time period when you're reading it, but it is jarring, and like I think it's something you should know about, like prepare yourself for going into the book. But if you know that, I mean, kind of, I guess, like both of our experience was, it's like, okay, not great, but accurate for 1924. I was in my early 20s when I read the Twilight series and had a huge issue with the sparkly vampires. Yep. Yeah, Bethany, my friend Bethany's just been doing a critical reread. I had a problem with him basically having the equivalent of a blood boner for her in the middle of science class in a YA novel, because I was very prudish at the time and I was scandalized. So, yeah. But anyway, I think that covers most of what I was going to say about reading and reviewing. I think people who watch me enough probably kind of intuitively have a sense of kind of how I review things, but I thought it would be good to kind of just refresh that or say it aloud. Yeah, again, my perspective is I'm a public reviewer, and the person I review for is you guys. Like, I want you to have information for you to figure out if you're going to like a book. Even if I love something, like, I'm very hard pressed to think of a book that I loved that I think everybody else would love or everybody else should read. Like, I want people to get enough information that they can find something that they will enjoy or they will like to read, or to avoid something that they may not enjoy or may not like to read. So that kind of drives my overall perspective. Woohoo! JD Robb. The next one comes out in September. I'm excited. Yeah. Nope. I did enjoy. Yeah. Twilight's one of those things where, like, I enjoy watching analysis about it, even though I don't like the actual books. So there you go. Bethany is providing a helpful warning service for people. And thought it was amazing. Yeah, exactly. I think if you read some of these books, if you read them young, there is just this nostalgia factor that's kind of hard to get rid of. But yeah. Well, I don't know if anybody has any final thoughts or questions, but I guess we can start wrapping this up. I didn't expect to whip this out tonight, but I do. This is one of my prized possessions, guys. Like, it's really because of the femolet. Like, look at it. It's just so... This tiny, tiny bangs. They look like Courtney Cox's bangs in the third Scream movie. Plants like whoa. So I have a black thumb. I am a plant killer. And really the only gardening I do is to keep the weeds from actually overtaking my house. I have like the crawlers that are inching towards my house. The problem is, believe it or not, 4.5 months after surgery, I am still recovering. So I can't really do much of the gardening. So I've been trying to do it in little like 20-minute bursts, but every time I plan to do it, it rains. So I'm sorry. I like looking at plants, but I accidentally kill them. Or in the case of the weeds, I purposely kill them. So it wouldn't be a very exciting tour, I'm afraid. Sorry. I do have some kitties like whoa content in my next vlog. So. Oh, goosebumps. Yeah. Strawberry plants. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I do. I do love a Harlequin Presents. I like a category romance. They get a bad rap, but there's some good ones out there. Yeah, the garden tour would basically just be like, hey, look, here's all of the weeds that have infested my front beds. Watch me take them out. Yep. Oh, welcome, Elizabeth. Yes, you be safe too. Everybody stay safe. Make good choices. Please wear a mask and socially distance yourselves. Please, please, please do it. I know people are getting antsy, but I don't care. Please do it. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for joining. I hope you guys have a wonderful night. I should be back next week. I don't know yet what we're going to talk about, but stay tuned. We'll figure it out. Thursday, you'll be seeing my most anticipated book releases for the rest of the year. So get excited for that. And yeah, I think that's it. Hope you guys are having a good night. I will catch you on the flippity flop. Bye.